Awesome. Uh, well, so cool to see all the progress on all these fronts. Um, I'm going to give you guys just a little bit of the backstory about how this whole equal vote coalition thing came about, and it's super awesome that Sam and Hallie are there because they've been participants since before. Well, in Hallie's case, since before there was an equal vote coalition. Part of my backstory is that I come from a political family, in that my dad was I was born into my dad's first political campaign. I can remember as a very young child one of my very earliest memories was peering over the edge of a kind of a living room crib as people were marking up precinct maps to go out and canvass for my dad's job as a state legislator. And then he went on to be Oregon's Attorney General, and ran for governor in 1990. And so I kind of had a front row seat at the political process for my entire life. And it was in 1990 when I first witnessed up close and personal this thing called the spoiler effect, which was where this is right when the sort of right wing extreme was starting to flex its muscles and do things like primary Republican centrists who wouldn't toe the party line. In Oregon, my dad had built up a strong enough base kind of across the spectrum that group knew that they couldn't knock him out in the primary. So they came to him and said, basically, like, look, if you don't adopt these particular policies as part of your platform, and if you don't agree to nominate these certain people to positions in the government, then we are going to run a candidate against you in the general election, and we're going to make sure that you lose. And he told them to take a hike. And so they gathered signatures, put an independent candidate on the ballot on a pro-life platform, and they did what they said they were going to do. There was the Democrat, in this case, Barbara Roberts, won in a plurality. She won with 46% of the vote. 42% of the vote went to my dad, and then another 12% or so went to a guy named Al Mobley. And at the age of 16, I was like, this is super unfair. This is not what I was promised with this whole thing called democracy. You shouldn't be able to win if you don't have the support of the people, and you shouldn't be able to, run a spoiler candidate in order to make somebody lose by splitting the vote. And what so that was that was sort of what really first got my gears turning in terms of the fundamental flaw in the plurality voting method. And so for years and years and years, I just sort of chewed on the problem. And in the 2000s, I became very enamored with a system called instant runoff voting. I was like, well, if you just have this kind of whole series of automatic runoffs and you progressively eliminate candidates, then you'd end up with a majority winner at the end of the day. And then somewhere in the 2009 timeframe, somebody said, yeah, but math, there's a big math problem with that system. And you can end up with some people's second choices being counted and other people's second choices not being counted. And so it can end up having really, really sideways results, which is what happened in Burlington in 2009, where, you had a candidate, the actual only majority candidate in the election was knocked out. And then a plurality winner once again got the job. And then Burlington went on and repealed instant runoff voting, also known as ranked choice voting. And so it wasn't really until 2011 that I had this kind of like aha moment, which was if we replace the primary, get rid of, instead of having this partisan primary, if we did approval voting in a primary election and then did that runoff in November, it would kind of solve the problem with that I think a lot of folks have with approval voting, which is that in approval, you don't get to express a preference. but so you get your preference choice in the runoff, and you get to support all the candidates you liked, and you get a fair count in the primary. And that was a system that we actually first put under petition in 2013 as the approval voting primary, and then ultimately we called it the unified primary. We didn't make it onto the ballot, but we did start to learn how to talk about it. And the day that the unified primary did not qualify was also the first day that the Equal Vote Coalition started. And so when we talk about the plurality voting and kind of the fundamental flaw in this, the real aha behind this, and I'm gonna, Annie or Sarah, you need to let me share my screen for just a second. I'm gonna share a couple of links, and by a couple I mean 4. So this is the what is the equal vote? So and it was actually a page on the Center for Election Science talking about approval voting. Does approval voting violate one person, one vote? This was this kind of aha moment where the CES has made this argument that, of course, approval voting does not violate the principle of one person, one vote, because what approval voting actually allows you to do is to balance other voters' expressions of opinion. In plurality voting, you can only balance somebody else's expression of opinion if there are just 2 candidates in the race. Anytime there are more than 2, if you support if you support a side that has more candidates, your vote carries less weight because everyone who thinks like you is going to split their support, and everyone who likes just that one candidate is going to concentrate their support. And so the weight and the measure of your vote is diminished the more that the more candidates that there are in the race that you like. And it's that inequality that creates the spoiler effect. It's that inequality that compels people to say, don't vote for your favorite candidate, vote for the lesser evil so that we can prevent the greater evil from winning. It's that one that says, only support the front runner on your side. Don't support that candidate that you really like. Don't support that, and in terms of equity, if you think about the underdog, if you think about the up and coming candidate, if you think about the Bernie Sanders, that's the candidate that you're being told to vote against, is the candidate that supports your values. I mean, I'm not saying anyone or everyone here is a supporter of any particular candidate, but it makes it much harder for someone who is not an incumbent, somebody who is not well-funded, somebody who is not chosen by the party insiders to actually have a chance to win the election. And so when the Center for Election Science made that argument, which is a truly compelling argument about why approval voting satisfies the principle of one person, one vote, what it made us realize was, if approval voting is equal, then plurality voting is not equal. They can't both satisfy the principle of one person, one vote. So the whole notion of the Equal Vote Coalition is ultimately to bring true equality into the vote, to let us be able to vote our conscience on any candidate, regardless of what the media says about electability, how much funds they've raised, what endorsements they have or haven't gotten, but that we can actually look at any candidate on the ballot and say, I want to support that one to whatever degree. I want to support that candidate, and let's just see what all the voters actually think. And again, this is all kind of like the backstory to get to star voting. In the fall of 2014, we held a conference because the open primary was on the ballot in Oregon, and we invited speakers from around the country. Aaron Hamlin came out, the executive director of the Center for Election Science. Rob Ritchie from Fair Vote came out, and they had a debate. And at the end of that day, Rob Ritchie actually proposed a compromise. And he said, what if you had an approval primary and you also ranked the candidates at the same time, so that you could run your unified primary idea, and then at the end of it, you would already know which candidate all the voters preferred. so you could have that an automatic runoff at the same time. And he was saying, like, let's collaborate. Let's do a system. We'll propose this for, you know, overseas voters so that they don't have to send in 2 ballots. And when he first proposed it, I thought the idea was nuts, because who's going to want to have both an approval ballot and a ranking ballot on the same piece of paper? Going to be super complicated. But then later, I think it was even later that very same day, was chatting with Clay Shentrup, who was one of the founders of the Center for Election Science. And I talked about Rob's wild idea. And somewhere in the conversation, we realized that a scoring ballot tells you both of those pieces of information. It tells you how much you support a candidate on the ballot. And then it also shows you all of the preference orders between the candidates to the degree that you can express them on, you know, what sort of whatever the scoring scale is. And that was really the genesis point of star voting. Is it takes the it balances out the weaknesses of the approval class and the instant runoff class of voting systems, and really embodies the strengths of both approaches. And it was really over the course of the last 6 years that, you know, Center for Election Science, they had a researcher at Harvard who was doing a thorough characterization of voting methods, a guy by the name of Jamison Quinn, who created this study called voter satisfaction efficiency to measure what VSE really measures is how representative is a system, how likely is a voting system to pick the candidate that is most representative of what the voters actually want. And he sort of as an afterthought, he added star voting, which was then called score runoff. He added star to the VSE simulation. And I remember getting an email from him saying, I think you're going to like the results, because what he showed was that star out of, and he had, it was more than a dozen different voting systems. Star performed at really basically at the very top of the list, not just for people, not just for voters when they're voting honestly, but actually in over a fairly wide range of different strategic voting models as well. And so it was that kind of, you know, getting the scientific underpinning, the scientific approach to analyzing it that really gave us, I think, that last bit of confidence to take star to really push it forward. And it wasn't until the end of 2016 when after that presidential election, there was just a ton of energy around voting method reform. Portland had organized a large chapter of folks who were interested in going after ranked choice voting. And one of the organizers invited us to come up and talk about what was then called score runoff voting. And I remember running into Sarah Wolk at that event, and she's like, "Why are you even doing this? Like, just get on the bus, get behind ranked choice. Ranked choice is the ship that is sailing. Why are you offering up this crazy new idea solution?" And then, you know, we sort of just pointed out the math problems of instant runoff. And again, I mean, I came at this very early on as a huge proponent of instant runoff voting, and just said, look, here is what star does. Star actually delivers on the talking points of instant runoff voting and ranked choice. The reason you want ranked choice is because you've been offered a set of properties that unfortunately ranked choice doesn't actually have. And so that was what I believe turned Sarah from a supporter of instant runoff into a passionate supporter for star. And it wasn't just Sarah. We actually, when we went up to Portland in 2016 and early 2017, there's a whole group of voting reform-minded folks who had gathered, and at the end of the day, a strong majority of those folks voted to move forward with star voting as the principal reform. And you know, it was since then it's just been more and more momentum built. We had our first campaign here in Lane County in 2018. Strange, coincidentally enough, it did not pass, and the percentages were 46 against, 42 in favor, and 12 left it blank. So those were the same numbers, or just about, as my dad's gubernatorial campaign in 1990. World works in strange ways. But what we were most interested in down here, at least for me, was that 12% who left it blank. Because what we found is that in any precinct where there was one sign that said vote for star voting, it carried. And here in Eugene, it carried by a wide margin. So when people actually learned about it, they liked it. And so we see this as really an opportunity, at least I do. I see this as an opportunity really about education. And I think probably the most important thing that we can be doing right now, other than just continuing to move move down the field on measures for consideration, is spread the word and have encourage people who are, particularly people who are very passionate about election reform, to do the deep dive and to really examine the reform options on the table. Approval voting has passed now in Fargo, and actually the system that we originally started with, which was the unified primary, just passed in St. Louis. And ranked choice has passed in Alaska. It didn't pass in Massachusetts. It's used in a bunch of towns. So I think we have the kind of the backdrop now to have a real conversation about voting reform. And to Michael, to your point, I think it's all to the good that we have different methods passing in different places, so we get a lot of real data about what voters really like, what are the outcomes, what's fair. I think we've done a lot of homework here in Oregon. We got our first usage in a real political election in 2020 in the form of the Independent Party of Oregon's primary election. That gave us a lot of great data. STAR is now being used internally in political organizations. And we've got tens of thousands of votes cast online at the Star.vote website. And I'm just loving seeing all the chapters popping up. But this is at the end of the day, this is all about fair representation. This is all about making sure that our votes count equally, not just that we all get a vote, but that we all have an equally weighted vote. And the hope is that the outcome from that is that we, the people, will actually get outcomes in government that match what the people want. And so that's my spiel. I'm happy to take any questions, but I also don't want to take up too much of the PDX meeting time.
No, that's fine. If anybody had any questions, you can either post it in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand or just chime in.
All right. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. For the love of the vote.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I did have one question, Mark. I was not able to get to my button. What happened to Rob Ritchie on the compromise then after that, where he was talking about this sort of the rank, the approval and rank primary ballot from the origins of Star there.
What happened to Rob?
Did we lose Rob Ritchie on the switch to a scored method, or what happened?
I consider Rob to be sort of the deadbeat dad of Star voting. He's pretty much disclaimed it and have, Fair Vote's written, they wrote a pretty nasty and I think wildly inaccurate hit piece about it. I think my sense is that I think they've got the train that they like, and they're not, and you hear that a lot in Oregon. I mean, there are groups like the Sightline Institute that have been sort of laying the groundwork for ranked choice in Oregon and getting, the various political powers that be on board, presenting to, League of Women Voters and lots of different organizations that are interested in election reform. And so, Starr kind of throws a wrench into that narrative. And so I've definitely noticed this, that when with humans generally, when we've got sort of skin in the game, there can be a tendency to lash out at things that push against that narrative.
So kind of defending against the decision that was already made rather than.
Yeah, and again, I can't speak. I don't. You can't know the insides of anybody else's mind, but you can just see sort of what the actions are. To me, the sort of there's a lot of, this system hasn't ever been used, therefore it shouldn't be used, is sort of the biggest piece of crazy logic in the fair vote analysis, right? Which is sort of like, why would we ever use a smartphone when we've been using the telegraph so successfully for so long?
Great, thanks.
Oops, Michael,
All right, any other questions?
there. I see Michael talking, but not hearing it. So you might want to hit the unmute on the Zoom interface.
There, I had my own phone muted. Okay. Mark, you mentioned the recommendation that people do a deep dive, you called it. I wonder if you've written up a short list of how newbies can best take that deep dive.
I have not, actually. That's a great idea. But I would, things, and I would say, for example, looking at the position papers, the position writings that Starr Voting has done. Look at the piece that Fair Vote wrote about Starr Voting, and then look at our response. So I'll put the link here.
And if I can chime in, I've actually just added a couple new things to our starvoting.us/articles page, which catalogs all the different articles. So we've got them sorted by great introductory pieces, essential reading, and then some deep dive stuff for the election enthusiast. But at the end, there's now a new section that includes two of the kind of hit pieces or factually debunked articles against Starr Voting and the responses to them. So,
and those are under the deep dive section, in the deep dive section?
Yeah, starvoting.us/articles. And then if you scroll down to the bottom of the list, that's the section for refuting other people's stuff. And
okay, great.
Mark has an article that refutes the fair vote piece, but the one that I linked is Jameson Quinn's, because he's got all the credentials to do that from a really strong and neutral position, and because he wasn't affiliated with us at all at the time that he wrote that.
Cool.
So Damien wrote a question in the chat. He said, has Equal Vote Coalition reached out to Equal Citizens, Lawrence Lessig's organization?
Yeah,
I see you not.
A number of times I've reached out to Lawrence to check it out on a few occasions. I think Sarah, you've had some conversation there as well.
Yeah.
And I think, well, one of the interesting pieces is if we are going to actually have a presidential election that is sort of fair and unified across the country, you need something that can be summed state by state. And so that's another one where a star type system is critical. Star or approval or something of that nature versus you think about the lack of precinct summability of instant runoff. It's not just precinct. If you've got to get all of the ranking data from the entire country together to figure out who won, that's just not a manageable system.
Right. And ranked choice has been used on the national level in countries like Australia and Ireland, but the scale of the United States of America is orders of magnitude bigger than Australia. So Lawrence Lessig, I think, is interested, but I know he's a longtime friend and colleague of Rob Ritchie from Fair Vote, and the two of them are very tight.
Yeah, and it's, to me, debate is healthy. So I think what I would like to see us encourage, particularly over this legislative cycle, and Annie, I'm going to be happy to jump in on Tuesday to say, check in on the process there, but is really the probably the most important thing is that legislators who are considering all this do the deep look and really that we have a framework to have that kind of conversation around approval voting, star voting, ranked choice voting, that we're actually rather than just pushing one option to the ballot, given that there are multiple ideas in play, that we should have a real conversation about it.
Mark, I've got another question. Is that okay, Sarah? Or is your hand up?
My hand's up. I'm just going to throw in a quick thing just because it's on this topic. But obviously the Equal Vote Coalition, there's a few different ways our vote is unequal, and we focus so far on the voting method itself, but also gerrymandering and the Electoral College, voter disenfranchisement, those all fall under that same mission statement sort of umbrella. And for dealing with the Electoral College and the inequities there, the Equal Citizens proposal from Lawrence Lessig is a great proposal that I really like. It wouldn't get us to 100% equality, but really functionally would get us way closer. And National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is the other option that would address that inequity. And star voting is fully compatible with both. So back to you, Michael.
Okay, thank you. Mark, my other question has to do with the what recommendation you're making right now on the use of primaries or not. I mean, star actually obviously can function without a primary at all. But I'm wondering if you see any persuasive reasons to maintain a primary anyway. And if so, what voting method you recommend for the primary? Like, could it be approval properly instead of star in the primary if you go that way? It's a multi-layered question, but do what you can with it.
Yeah, and I think there are different schools of thought on this topic. For me, the method that I have, or the concept that I push forward with my local representative to turn into a bill concept is really just all about replacing plurality with star. So it would be an idea that here in Oregon, it wouldn't upset the notion that there are political party primaries. It would just say in the partisan elections, it would use star voting in those partisan primaries and then star voting in the general election. And the one change that it would make to that structure is that for the nonpartisan races, the local and county elections, that the default format for those would be just one star vote in November, no two elections, much shorter campaign cycle, less money in politics. So that's the concept that I see. It doesn't pick the fight with the political parties, because you'll find that the political parties are very attached, particularly the dominant ones are very attached to their primary structure. And so saying, let's have the discussion about plurality voting and not mix it in with partisan primaries are super unfair and gerrymandering sucks. So that's more of a political calculus and saying, let's have a very targeted reform that just makes STAR happen without raising the hackles of every party insider in the party apparatus and the D's and the R's. There are other proposals like you talked about top 4 IRV. That Sarah has a concept for top 5 plus STAR. I think those are all totally valid options that should be on the table. But what I guess for me, just getting STAR to be the method that we use to make the selection. Once that happens for a couple of cycles, people will be like, well, why are we doing this whole primary thing anyway? I mean, if we had that system, if we had the STAR in the political primaries and in the general election, I mean, I'd consider running as an independent for some office, right? Because you just go, well, hey, it's a STAR vote. I don't need to go through a party primary to get on the ballot. And once I'm on the ballot, people can have a fair vote.
Right.
To top the name of another organization.
Great. Simple.
Keep it simple.
Any other?
Yeah. The big
Any-
takeaway there is that STAR voting is very adaptable. So whatever other electoral pieces of the puzzle people are attached to, STAR voting is still the answer. And that is why I see it as such a unifying reform, such a consensus reform. It allows everyone to get what they want without sacrificing the little piece that they're super excited about. Because we do have different why statements and different angles that we approach this topic from.
Yeah, and I think that approach of just sort of it lets you have, it's one of the reasons why I wouldn't lump in the national popular vote into a STAR voting initiative or a campaign finance reform piece or a redistricting reform or whatever. Is I would like people to evaluate STAR on its merits and consider it for adoption. And I think there are a lot of people who are political insiders who very much like that voting method, but wouldn't want to change away from the partisan primary structure. And so keeping it narrowly focused on let's just get the voting method reformed, that will have such an effect on the outcomes, I believe, that it might become very obvious after the fact that we should do additional modifications. And I think with that, I'm gonna let you all to your Portland meeting. I appreciate the time and really appreciate you guys jumping in to help push this down the field. I was one other thing that I think is worth mentioning is that systemic change is a difficult, non-trivial undertaking. When you think about SpaceX, it took them 4 tries to get a rocket that didn't explode over many years and a ton of effort. But it's ultimately worth it, I believe, to fix the political system that we've got. So let's just keep fighting.